Thanks so much for the introduction, and thank you to Mia for inviting us here. Um, yeah, okay, great. Let's just go around so everybody can introduce themselves. My name is Alex Hanna. I'm a senior research scientist on the ethical AI team at Google. I was reporting to Tanit as my manager until 2 days ago. Um, oh my God, I said something and my phone was like, I said Tanit and then my Google phone started talking to me. Very creepy stuff. Okay, so let's go around. Let's everybody introduce each other. So let's go ahead and Alex, do you want to go ahead, introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, Alex. I'm Alex. I am right now a postdoc at Carnegie Mellon. I'm working with Sarah Fox and Ken Holstein. And yeah, I don't know. Is there anything else I should say? No.
How about what's giving you some joy right now in our very um, upsetting times?
Well, I'm involved in a few organizing projects with a group called the Emergency Workplace Organizing Committee, which is a joint effort by DSA, Democratic Socialists of America, and UE, which is the United Electrical Workers Union. And that's giving me something to feel positive about.
Amazing. I love
Also,
it.
I like to play D&D. That's been fun lately.
Yes. And I imagine you're having some fun there on the bridge of the Star Trek Starship Enterprise.
Oh, yes. Yes, this is my home.
Amazing. Cool. Kendra?
Hi, thank you so much. My name is Kendra Wade. I am a PhD student and researcher at the University of Colorado Boulder. At CU Boulder, I work in the Identity Lab led by Dr. Jed Brubaker and the Internet Rules Lab led by Dr. Casey Fiesler. My specific areas of focus are in algorithmic identity and the digital surveillance of marginalized groups. In addition to my work at CU, I also am a founding fellow in the Digital Interests Lab under the direction of Dr. Ann Washington at NYU. And I am also playing D&D, several D&D campaigns right now. So fellow nerds unite.
I love it. Lastly, Anna.
Hi, everyone. I'm Anna Lauren Hoffman. I'm an assistant professor at the University of Washington's Information School. I don't play D&D. And it's a deep fault, something I'm ashamed of. But I mostly I focus broadly on data ethics and sort of in this context AI ethics as sort of my object of inquiry. So less sort of like ethical AI, like the ethics of AI, but how do particular discourses around ethics emerge? What affordances do they have? What possibilities or worlds do they open up? What do they forestall? So I really think about like how we talk about ethics matters. And in terms of something that's bringing me joy, I'll just shout out, I've been, because in my free time, I read academic work that is not in my area, right? Because that's the kind of nerd I am. I've been reading Elspeth Brown's work, A Queer History of Modeling, like literally fashion modeling. And it is phenomenal. It's a phenomenal book. And I've been getting up extra early before my toddler just so I can get some reading in every morning because it's amazing.
I love the nerdery all around. At least that's like a uniting topic, right? Whether it's D&D nerdery or reading some, kind of a proximate field. I didn't really say anything that was bringing me joy. And I will say one thing that's bringing me joy now is overwhelming solidarity across people. Had dozens of people reaching out to meet, to our team, saying that they support us, which is pretty amazing. So given everything that's happened. I think the original, sort of the original question, I wanted to sort of have an original provocation. And I'm sort of mulling how to do this, and I'm kind of doing this by dunking on Jeff Dean, because dunking on Jeff Dean is fun these days. And so Jeff Dean, if you don't know, is the Senior Vice President of Research at Google, heads up Google Research, and said in one of his comments from July 7th, AI is full of promise, with the potential to revolutionize so many different areas of modern society. In order to realize its true potential, our field needs to be welcoming to all people. As it stands today, it is definitely not. Our field has a problem with inclusiveness. Okay. And many people have been pointing out sort of the other, like, well, is this you? Okay. And so then the other thing I wanna highlight is actually kind of a line from the 2019 AI Now discriminating systems report. This is developed by written by Sarah Miles, Meredith Whitaker, who just spoke, and Kate Crawford. And in it, the last point that they make on this is this point. The use of AI systems for the classification, detection, and prediction of race and gender is an urgent need of reevaluation. I have a puppy that's coming to join. The histories of race science are a grim reminder that race and gender classification based on appearance is scientifically flawed and easily abused. Okay, Callie, please, you're stealing the show. And so I'll just end there. So I wanted to take these two statements both because we're starting from a point where we're talking about sort of this idea of inclusion, what inclusion looks like, and then at the other end of this, talking about what AI systems are and what they do, and then what the space of criticism can be. And this is very pertinent to Neat's firing, because the at least stated purpose was this paper that was critical of some AI models. So I have a question on that. I just want to use as a provocation, and then I want to kick it to each of you to say a little bit more about that tension there. So let's go in reverse order and start with Anna.
Sorry, I gotta get this mute button. So, Alex, I'm gonna ask you, can you sort of re-articulate the provocation to me across these sort of characters and events that that you I mean, I just want to set some bounds on where the
I think thanks. I mean, I think the kind of articulation is, on one hand, on one hand there's so much talk in AI around quote unquote inclusion, the necessity of inclusion coming from the top. At the same time, there is this other end of saying, like, these pointed criticisms around classification, detection, and prediction of race and gender themselves are pretty are coming here from people who are more critical of the field as AI as a discriminating technology. And so, those are criticisms that are not really rendered as sort of like legible, whereas being included in the situation is. So for instance, I'll just leave it there. And I'm trying to sort of draw your thoughts on that sort of, those, both of them are sort of using the language of inclusion, but like, what's happening there? Like, where's the disconnect?
Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you. I appreciate that. So one thing that I find really interesting in especially in the tweet or the note, I think, and I saw it reiterated in a tweet thread by Jeff Dean, who I don't know, I don't work at Google, but there was language in there that I find shockingly sort of consistent across AI, sort of socially conscious AI initiatives, responsible AI, ethical AI, AI for social good, these various manifestations. And the word you always hear is potential, right? You always hear this potential. And what I find so fascinating is that the potential is always oriented towards like the potential for good, right? That, I mean, for there are marketing reasons, there are other reasons, but we're always being asked, right, to come forward and ground ourselves in the potential of this radical technology, this amazing the amazing possibility of artificial intelligence or sort of related tools, and I find that does a couple of things. The thing that springs immediately to mind is something I've been reading by the geographer Sarah Elwood lately, and she is specifically talking about AI in the context of a smart city, but she notes that like we need to be sort of constantly mindful of the ways that sort of consent to particular kinds of social arrangements are being cultivated. So there is like there's a political dimension, there's a technical dimension, but there's also this kind of discursive dimension of this invitation to the potential, this potential that is always good, right? That is always going to benefit. If we do it right, I find it very, if we like do this right and we do it inclusively, right? And so it's this way of sort of fostering buy-in from folks who would otherwise be critics, who would otherwise be resistant, right? It's sort of like if you aren't sort of bought into the potential, then you even your critical voice then gets you get put outside the frame, right? And so it's not a kind of neutral inclusion that these initiatives are asking for, right? They're asking you to accept the terms of debate and then work within that sort of boundary. The gender terms, the racialized terms, and we never start from the potential of like that these are fundamentally discriminatory systems. And what if our ethics started from a place where we know everything's broken? And that's you would have to take a radically different stance than one in some of the statements that you've pointed to. So I'll leave it there, but I'll just summarize by saying I think it's really, I love this framing of thinking about the ways that your consent to particular kinds of arrangements is being fostered.
Yeah, I love that. I love that kind of start. Kendra.
Yeah, so speaking to Anna's point, I feel like that is consistent language, and it's very PR language, that we are looking for a hopeful future, a hopeful tomorrow, that we're all approaching something that obviously we can't do now, which I completely disagree with. We live in a world where we have all of the capabilities, especially through technology, to be able to be inclusive and to be able to reach bounds that were not previously available. Especially through connectivity and through the diversity that we have in being globally connected. And I feel like this kind of like PR type of language of that we hope for a better tomorrow, we hope for a better future, is really, for a lot of these companies, it's something to make them look good. As they were talking about in the last discussion, it's about protecting the company and not actually protecting the employees or even the users. And so when it comes to it, from my perspective, it's not just about, inclusive hiring, which is a lot of what we see now in how we're going to solve these problems. If we have a diverse team, then we're able to obviously solve all the problems of the world, solve all the problems of diversity. And so it's not just about inclusive hiring, it's also about inclusive culture. So hiring diverse people to work on a team that still maintains discriminatory practices, ideologies, and approaches to the work that they conduct is just as big of a problem. So it doesn't do much for diversity if those diverse individuals working in these places are still in an environment where they do not feel like they are appreciated, like their unique capabilities and perspectives can thrive or be appreciated and incorporated into the way things work and the technologies being built. So once the first step is to actually have a diverse team, an inclusive team, and then to put them in an environment that's going to support their work and to support their identity. And then once you have this diverse team functioning within this inclusive culture, the task is then in achieving diversity in the AI itself. And that comes from addressing the issues of infrastructure within the systems that are being used to sort and categorize people.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, thinking about this language and what language that is being used is, you know, a language of diversity, a language of inclusion, and yet, you know, what is actually happening in the companies looks much different. Alex.
Yeah, so this is making me think of I guess to speak from my own position as like an academic worker, as an employee of a university, like to think about like who are the actors, like who are making the decisions. And like I think sometimes we can get stuck in like assigning like particular blame to like tech companies, which like yes, they deserve a lot of blame. They have caused so much harm. But I think also, and this is something that I like feel very personally as like an academic worker, because like I see like the university as like a big part of this system. Like I've heard the phrase like academic, military, industrial complex, and I say this over and over because like universities are employing the very same tactics of like diversity as like companies do, which is that like, you know, we're going to recruit like PhD students in AI, in computer science, and we're going to funnel them into the industries, and we're going to take money from DoD and do ICE contracts and like create predictive policing algorithms for police departments using that grad student labor. And like that completely gets missed because like you sort of like have all of the, you have the sense that like because it's a university, you know, surely it must be like doing work for the common good. Surely it must be intellectually meaningful in some way. But it's not. It's a partnership that's grounded in economic, political context. And so like I'll give you one example. Carnegie Mellon, which is my employer, just did a recruitment event called Imagining Anti-Racist Futures for the computer science department. Pretty solid concept, right? But this same department has a connection to the military to create autonomous tanks and Humvees for the US Army. And it's like when we talk about diversity, like who actually is represented by that concept? Is it the diverse PhD student who's conducting the work? Is it diverse faculty members who are overseeing them? Is it diverse university presidents who make billions of dollars? Or is it the people who are going to be targeted by this technology that is being developed in the university?
This is, I mean, this is a fantastic point. I mean, I mean, there's a point, you know, in which, you know, there was a good paper that came out, or a paper that came out. I'm not saying it's a bad paper. I just actually haven't read it in full. So this is not the dog on it. But it was called the Gray Hoodie Project, and the authors at the University of Toronto had a you know, we're drawing the connection between the kind of funding that comes into this larger conversation around, let's say, fairness and ethics, and made the analogy and said, you know, like, what if big tobacco or what if big oil had these conferences that were about how to fix the problems with big tobacco and big, you know, big oil, and they, but it was funded by them, and they had all their own researchers. So how would you actually kind of think about that research? And yeah, the comments are saying, don't imagine it happens. And yeah, that's kind of the analogy in terms of big tech. On the flip side of that, thinking about, you know, the money that really comes from academic departments as well as the endowments. I mean, the endowments that fund universities, these old universities were built on slave labor. They were built on the funds. I mean, and I actually like the way that Tressie McMillan Cotton has started thinking about this, and she has a piece in the Sociology of Race and Ethnicity that sort of talks about how platforms are bundles of capital, and that capital is racialized. And so if we're thinking about platforms in that way, there's also the way that we think about universities that way. So these things are surely connected. And so, yeah, okay. So in terms of this kind of conversation about, I want to kind of pull on this thread about AI systems as sort of discriminating systems, and not necessarily thinking about them as systems which are what do I want to say here? I guess the question here is thinking about the connection of the development of AI and the connection of what would it actually take to have systems that like kind of or kind of to reimagine systems that are going to work for people, because I think this is a thread that this sort of has sort of go that is connecting all your comments. I want to start with Candria, because in one of the questions before that, you had kind of asked, like, what would it take in sort of achieving diversity in AI tech development? Like, what is it above and beyond to just hiring a diverse team?
Absolutely. Thank you for the question. So of course, like you said, it's starting from the ground level. If you have to have the people who can speak to and come from diverse positions, from racially, gender identities, different socioeconomic backgrounds. And from there, again, like I said before, it has to do with, the infrastructure. That's where this team needs to actually get in and do the dirty work of why are the systems broken as we see them now. In our 2020 CSCW publication entitled How We've Taught Algorithms to See Identity, Constructing Race and Gender in Image Databases for Facial Analysis, we specifically focus on how identity is operationalized in technical systems and how those systems completely ignore the invisible aspects of identity, while also rarely containing annotations, justifications, or reasoning as to how decisions of classification are made. So without these details on how decisions are made, the classifications of race and gender are portrayed as insignificant, indisputable, and apolitical, which we know is not true. And the systems that are trained on human data are now being reinforced with categorizations and descriptions of individuals that were determined by whomever, developed the system and collected the data and built the database. Because of this, I feel that the infrastructure of these systems has various levels of bias built in, some subtle and some is very overt. And that bias has carried into a digital realm from histories of classification and creations of taxonomies in the physical world. We see harmful and very outdated descriptions of humans and systems based on methods like phenotyping for race and only containing binary classifications for gender. There's also not typically a lot of diversity in the training data, making these classifications completely inaccurate or at times impossible for those of different races, cultural backgrounds, gender identities, and lots of other defining characteristics of an individual. And so I feel like to address this, to truly get at fixing these issues, there needs to be more accountability, transparency, and investigation into why certain classifications or categories for humans are defined in systems, how those are determined. And we also need to investigate if those classifications and categories are appropriate, if they're fair, respectful, inoffensive. And one of the things I find most important is, do these classifications within these systems, are they something that the populations of individuals that they describe can agree with? If not, they need to be revisited and revised and maybe even retracted until a more accurate, definitely more modern and more fair picture can be drawn of who these individuals actually are. That comes with, clear annotations of how these decisions are being made and collectively decided reasoning. Those are key here. It's not just about what one person from afar decides is, all of the taxonomies for these groups. In our paper, we do encourage database authors and AI developers in general to address both histories of classifications inherently embedded into race and gender, as well as their own positionality in embedding such classifications. So the reflexivity can help to open more doors for diverse hires in tech development, as those in industry and academia need to be able to work with the real individuals within a diverse population from an understood and embodied and lived perspective, not just guessing from afar and making decisions for groups that they honestly probably don't belong to. So I really feel that reflexivity leads to a recognition of gaps in knowledge. And honestly, those gaps in knowledge can only be filled by the diverse individuals that the issues at hand concern.
Yes, I mean, I love this framing here, both of thinking about this idea of kind of these data and thinking about this from an infrastructure level, and also thinking about what those histories of classification are. And I mean, I think this is sort of, this definitely gets at this sort of idea of not only understanding what that history is, but understanding who has lived through those histories and who is bringing to bear, what those what those technologies look like. I want Alex or Anna, do you have any other thoughts on that line of thinking?
Yeah, I mean, I might sort of pick up on that by talking about some work that me and Anna did together, which was along the lines of trans voice training. So this was something that I worked on during my dissertation, and it was looking at how like trans voice training apps, so like these are apps that like transgender folks might use to train their voices to be, different in any dimension, like pitch or resonance or range or tone. And it was really complicated and messy because like you do get into like the sort of standard problems of like, oh, this app isn't like gendering me correctly. Like it thinks that my voice is like, too masculine, too feminine. But that's kind of the very reason why people are using it too. Like there's this like internal sense that I want the system to get me right, but you yourself like don't necessarily control what those parameters are. And even that there can be so much variation, like what that means to you, like so that the app could never actually decide like in a way that would make sense for everyone using it. So the kind of, I guess, like solution that like I tried to like create was a system that like would allow the user to decide what that category would be defined as. So like what does winning look like? Like what does being gendered correctly mean to you? And then how to have that be the standard by which like you would receive feedback about your voice. Which I guess worked in some ways, but I mean, it's kind of like an incomplete solution because, you could use the app, but then turn around and be in society and then, who knows what would happen. So in that way, it was kind of like, I mean, it was tricky, but I guess like diverting more control or more agency to the person who is being analyzed by the system seemed to be like a pretty decent starting point.
Yeah, and I'll just weave these two cases together, both the sort of the voice apps context that Alex is talking in, and then Kendra's and Morgan's work on identity and image databases. One thing that I think gets lost, especially in the solutions that are sort of proffered for some of these problems, which are, we think about the sort of burgeoning domain and relevant to Tim Neat's work, right, around auditing and like algorithmic auditing, certain kinds of frameworks of fairness to excavate and shed light on particular biases or particular affordances of a given system. And one thing that I struggle with with that work is that they often, it's easy for work in that vein to sort of reproduce the exact sort of thing that got us into the mess in the first place, which is to take up particular kinds of identity variables, whether it's racial categories, whether it's gendered categories, and then to take them as like pre-given, like a priori, as if they are not the product of institutional, social, political, and other arrangements, right? To treat them as natural, and then use that as your like cudgel, your like ethical cudgel to step to a system, right? And you're just doing the same thing from a different direction, and basically we've all already slotted ourselves into this like, here's a good way to use categories, here's a bad way to use categories, right? And what's lost there is the productive aspect. Is like, how are particular systems arranging people and arranging and assigning and distributing vulnerability and power, right? Like how is the system sort of productive of relationships, which is a different question than saying like, well, we're going to take a preset collection of racial categories and then audit the system. And I think this also gets to there was a question in the chat about expertise and the role of expertise in all of this. I'm somebody who maybe is like, maybe I'll be an odd person out here who values expertise in an almost kind of old school way. But I say that specifically because, like, if a nuclear reactor melts down, I want somebody to know how to fix that, right? Like there's particular kinds of expertise that like I want to value, but at the same time, how are we then arranging the world around that kind of expertise? Where is money flowing? Where is power and prestige flowing, right? So you can have expertise that is not sort of imbricated in particular the kinds of hierarchies that we see now. You can see expertise existing in more distributed ways. And so that's where, so to kind of pull that back in, like, I think there's a role for expertise, but again, we need to not lose track of like, how are we producing particular relationships and distributing vulnerabilities and power? Like that is, to me, the productive question.
So I really like this kind of question, because I think there's sort of two ways of taking this, and the thing that I often say, especially around Tanit's work and Joy's work, especially the kind of groundbreaking gender shade system, is that there's two ways to take that work. There's one way of taking that work that is pretty narrow. There's a way of taking that work that says, let's look at skin tone, and the problem is actually that we need more people of different kinds of skin tones in these data sets, and we're gonna do that. And many people ran with it. It was very legible. IBM ran with it. IBM went as far to release a data set called the Diversity in Faces data set, in which they had scraped millions of images from Flickr, and then they did a kind of a key point analysis of all those different faces. Said, look, we've used this data set and it's released all our models. Not to mention that data set and people who use that data set are now imbricated in litigation around under the Illinois privacy law for taking their faces and using their likenesses. That's the minimal kind of critique of that. And I think that's sort of the minimal interpretation of inclusion. The maximal or more broad kind of look at inclusion is saying, okay, well, let's actually broaden this, and let's actually understand what's happening here and how are technologies of reading the face used in the world. How do they replicate existing relationships? And we've seen Not only that, not only that these systems are racist in their errors, but they're racist in their applications. And we saw in Detroit 2 Black men wrongfully arrested under suspicion with using those facial recognition algorithms. So really, in terms of thinking about what that space even looks like, taking that work, that thing you're talking about, Anna, flipping it and saying, turning around and using it to replicate existing relationships, when the problem are the relationships, right? All right, I'm going to take some questions from the audience. So for Anna, a question from Katrina Ingram: how do we get outside that dynamic of AI auditing examining systems? What would it look like? Is it possible? Also, where should we say no? It's not appropriate to use AI. So a number of different questions there.
Yeah. So this term outside is interesting to me. So there's a so how do we, so you can read that 2 ways. One, how do we get like outside of the sort of set of logics that produce that as a solution? And to that, I would say like there is no outside, right? There's no outside to that. But how do we maybe get beyond that as a kind of solutions framework? And yeah, I think again, and bringing in that suggestion of no, that suggestion of refusal, I just want to come back to and sort of re-articulate the necessity of asking, of being very mindful of the kinds of terms that we're being asked to consent to. What I find powerful about rejection or refusal, and the kind of things like facial recognition technology bans that Alex alludes to, is that they, in some cases, right, they represent this kind of critical confrontation with the terms that are on offer. That's what refusal is. It's a declination of terms, right? We kind of take refusal to be, there's one way you can read it as like, petulant child saying no, right? No, I don't want that. But no, what refusal literally means in the Oxford English Dictionary, right, is a declination of terms. Like you're offered a set of terms and you decline them, and you refuse them. And I see some of these sort of efforts as that engagement, but that's not the end of the conversation, right? And that's the other thing I want to emphasize, is that kind of refusal is, there's another step, which is like, what's the next set of terms? And I'm not going to say what I think those are or should be, because no one person should do that. But that'll just kind of, it was a little meandering, but I'll just leave that kind of jumbled collection of thoughts there for folks.
Awesome. Ayushi has a question. Every category or in every categorization has politics. How should we discuss about arranging this techno-utopia driven world to be more humane? Who should not be doing it? Everyone says who should be doing, but I want to understand who should not be doing. What needs dismantling to have a better world? Yeah, Alex.
Capitalism. Capitalism is what needs to be dismantled.
Yes, so the big C word has come into the building, and let's talk about it. Let's talk about this, because I want to talk about this on a kind of a more concrete way, and thinking about what kinds of modes of practice this looks like. So for instance, one example I want to bring in is the way that Alondra Nelson talks about this kind of racialization, categorization on one hand, and practical politics on the other hand. And in her book, Body and Soul, she talks about how if Black activists fought or had practical politics around categorization, and what did that look like? And the way she found that that looked like was the way in which these activists interacted with healthcare systems, more notably kind of talking about their mobilization around healthcare and providing of community health and structuring things around mutual aid programs, and including the kind of popular breakfast program that they had in Oakland and a number of different cities around the US. So in terms of thinking about kind of technologies that are not built in the ways in which there are dismantlings of this, um, what does that look like in terms of when the rubber hits the road? Like, what is the sort of practical politics of that? And I'd say for this audience, what does it mean in terms of in their own organizations or in their own action? What are examples of that? And that's open to everyone. So open it up.
Well, I feel like there are some questions here of what capital means in this capitalism. It is financial capital, but as we're dealing with data and systems, it's also human capital. And so we're dealing with actual people, with users, and with their information, where there are a lot of, digital literacy is lacking in a lot of parts of the country, where people don't really have a full understanding of what the data or the information they're putting out there is providing to these major companies and means of capital, which then translates, of human capital, which then translates into money and financial capital. Something that I've discussed and that I think Karen mentioned previously in the chat is the availability to tap into lay expertise. And I think that that's something that we could really harness in building these systems and in using the people who are on the ground, especially when we're looking at activist groups, to build better technologies that are more tailored and suited for their specialized needs. And so I feel like that's something that we are definitely lacking, because when it comes to huge companies, capital is not thought of, or capitalism is not thought of as being the lay, as the people on the ground, as the users, because who are they? We're determining things for them. We're building systems for them to use. And so I think that not looking at how we could actually speak to the people who we typically don't consider experts, and seeing what their firsthand perspectives are, is not looking to that as a huge missed opportunity to me. That's something that we, as academics and as researchers and as industry practitioners, that it's missing, and it's an opportunity in development and deployment for systems that could actually work better for people if we were designing for people and not for what we assume people need.
Yeah, this is an excellent point in thinking about the kind of relationship. You're thinking about different kinds of ways in which technology is providing for people. And I kind of want to tie this thread back to Anna's comment in terms of thinking about kind of refusal. And I mean, what you have to give up in sort of accepting the terms of particular sort of technology means that you're accepting sort of systems of classification. Um, I'm sort of reminded of some of the work that the Our Data Bodies project has created in some of their midterm reports, in which they're talking to people who don't have any kind of expertise in these technical systems, and they're talking to them about like credit scoring systems, and people don't want credit scoring systems. They don't want to be classified. They don't want to be classified in these kinds of ways, and they're not. And that it's in this way, in having some kind of a system or a set of systems, these kinds of modes of classifications themselves are kind of a particular way of inflicting violence, in just by the act. And so having different kinds of technologies means that they look much more local, much more in control. Actually, I'm reminded of a helpful op-ed that Meredith Whitaker wrote about in the Boston Globe that was a bit about this, and about kind of this idea of expertise, and her expertise as being someone who knows about the risks, but also people are going to know much more about what they need in terms of their own kind of technologies, or what kinds of things would facilitate life for them. Okay, so we've got about, I think, 5? I'm not quite sure how much of time we have left. We started, I think, at 35 after. I think we had 55. So I think we have 10 minutes. Um, so, um, so here's a question from.
I'm sorry, Alex, just to let you know, we do have more time for you.
Oh, wonderful. Okay.
45, so 24 minutes. Go for it. Yeah.
Oh, amazing. Okay, great. Wonderful. Um, so, a question from Buse. How do we decenter tech and recenter life when working in this field? And I'm going to actually sort of pair this with this question from Memunat, which is most of the pushbacks on unethical AI have been reactive. How do how does one determine if the technology shouldn't be built in the ideation phase? What questions could be helpful in determining that? Okay, so those pair of questions I think go well together, and I'm opening it up to whomever wants to take it.
Yeah, I think I could speak on this a little bit. So like while Kendra was talking, like people were lighting up the chat about like participatory design. And I wanted to catch on that because like I had sort of tried to use participatory design methods in my work. And what like I noticed and what a lot of other people have noticed is that like these very methods, despite like sort of having an intention of opening the design process to people outside the core like academic team or industry team, whatever, actually just reinforces that same difference, because what ends up happening is that people are invited to participate, but the question of control is never really addressed. The question of power is never really addressed. And so like, because of that, like people rightfully so, like continue to become suspicious of like academics, suspicious of tech companies, and they sort of see like, yeah, like this is kind of a scam. Like, I mean, a lot of great work has come from the field of participatory design, and that could include like, you know, interviewing people about their experiences and bringing people in to do brainstorming activities to ask them like, what would work for you? What, you know, what kind of technology will work for you? But again, like they are coming, the designers are coming from the perspective of like, well, we ultimately like need to make something, like something has to be designed. And so like, you know, you can't necessarily like publish a paper. I mean, maybe you can in limited areas, but like if you publish a paper saying, well, actually, like we decided not to do anything, like, I mean, that's totally valid and should be valid, but the incentive structure of the university and in industry is not set up that way where that's like a valid option at all for someone who wants to have a job anyway. So like, because of that, you know, a lot of people have like tried to think through ways that we actually could take some of these methods or the seeds of ideas that participatory design has wanted to have, but actually make it like real, like actually do it. And part of that seems to be for me at least, to completely decouple the design process from any incentive structure that currently exists in the academy or in industry. So that would mean like, you know, just giving researchers a mandate to just say like, you can do whatever you want, even if it's nothing, but like, and we're not going to penalize you for that. So like, I don't know, like that's kind of like what I'm thinking about in terms of like what was so-called like community-based research, which has a lot of problems, but could be like a way to start.
Yeah, I love this. Sort of thinking critically about what participation looks like and what that means. Um, Yeah, the other folks want to take this.
Oh, I was just going to plus one what Alex was saying. I think there's a lot of tension between what's required and what's actually needed.
Mm.
And so that is where we, that incentive structure, I just think that's such a, not beautiful thing, but that's such a very salient point here of that we as academics and as industry professionals are not rewarded or encouraged to actually go out and speak to the people where they are, speaking their language, reaching them where they need to be met. And so that's where it's not only about the participatory design in this, it's what comes out of it. It's not just taking these things and almost like if you went into a meeting with your boss and gave them all of these great ideas and they said, okay, thanks for that, but we're not going to listen to it and we're not going to do any of those, but thank you for contributing, just so you feel like you were a part of the conversation. And so I feel like that's a lot of what's going on here when there's a lot of missed opportunities. And I think a lot of that incentive structure, not only for researchers and academics, but also for companies, like I was saying before, is in the missed opportunities to tap into communities and diverse and marginalized groups that, I mean, if you want to steal everyone's data and if you want to do whatever you want to with it, manipulate it, there are lots of groups that are completely being overlooked because they're not being seen as valuable or worthy of being included in the conversation. And so just wanted to give a little bit of a plus one to what Alex was talking about here.
Yeah, absolutely. Having some saying that we actually kind of we took this we had people come in and then we didn't do anything about it. Right?
That's a waste of everyone's time at that point,
Right. Right. Well, except the companies who then uses it as kind of a branding opportunity, then ban these people out when they need the diversity uh, uh, um, uh, which they've done with Timney again, and a lot of her efforts in building alternative kinds of centers of community. I'm gonna ask Anna a question. This one comes from Morgan. How do you get people with power who reject refusal to take it seriously, or to view community views as serious when they devalue the non-technical, quote unquote, in terms of mathematics and CS?
Morgan, I'm so into your commentary in the chat. So again, this is my move. So there are multiple levels at which we can understand this inquiry, and I'm sorry, but so on the my gut reaction first is like, well, of course, like the people invested in who the people with a modicum of power and invested in the structures that support and give and allow power to flow to them. Yeah, they're not going to be interested in a refusal. And that, like, in what world are we? In what world do we expect that to that to happen? And so I think there are other folks in this panel who can speak better to like how you organize and you put demands to power in ways that are perhaps more effective. But then second, there is, I mean, this is a broader, this is the broader level of the sort of the ways that we again reproduce a particular kind of knowledge as as the knowledge, as the best knowledge, as true knowledge. I mean, there are decades of whether it's feminist technoscience critique, often painfully white, but still a particular kind of critique that work. There are you have centuries plus of Black feminist critique of like technosocial orders, right? And there is just this sort of bigger project of confronting the sort of discursive valorization of STEM that manifests itself in industry, in the academy, and also in non-governmental spaces as well, and increasingly also in the public spaces, right? Like this public interest technology movement, right? There are certainly some virtues to that, but also like if all it ends up doing is sort of reproducing the like glorification of STEM, then it will not have really, I think, changed the playing field in any way. And so that I don't have easy answers for, except to say that like there are long intellectual traditions, intellectual and political and engaged traditions that to draw on to continue to push. I think about Sarah Ahmed, feminist theorist Sarah Ahmed's essay, An Affinity of Hammers. She has this image of just like, you're hammering, somebody else next to you is hammering for a different reason, but you're all fucking hammering together. And that's the image I come back to here, like that there's no place that we step outside of. There's no utopic world that we get to. There's no world that's never going that we're going to see or generationally in proximity to us is going to see that isn't stained by everything we've done to the planet, that isn't stained by everything we've done to our communities, that isn't stained by everything we've done to our bodies, right? Like that's gonna be, that's the reality that we're sort of living in. And so yeah, how are you hammering and who are you hammering with is sort of the image I try to keep in my head.
I love this phrase. How how are we hammering and who are we hammering with, right? And in terms of thinking about, of course, if you're refusing, the people in power are not going to like the refusal, right? I mean, the whole idea is that these projects are colonizing projects. They're projects that encroach on all different spheres of one's life, right? And so, yes, absolutely. This is an interesting question by Karen, and I want to tackle it because I think it gets sort of to what I think everyone's sort of talking about here. And Karen asks, what type of infrastructure changes would be required to move away from classification as the goal of companies and models? It seems like part of this is the legacy from when the computational resources in tech was more limited, but maybe that's not correct. And I find it to be a pretty interesting provocation because it is not only about about classification being done kind of as a productive move of racism, sexism, in other kind of modes of domination and subjection, but it's thinking about what is there anti-coercive, anti-classification technology, and what kind of infrastructure we need to develop it. So I'm wondering if anyone wants to take that one.
So just a quick thought here. I've been thinking about a lot recently how there's a lot of opportunity to develop tailored technologies that fit the different communities and groups that are concerned or categorized within these systems. And so I think right now what we see a lot of times is that there is a straight line of development, that there is this universalist approach or this universal approach to that everything will work for all users, or the system that we're designing is going to work for all users. And it would just be interesting, this is just very much kind of brainstorming here, but I think that's an interesting question to maybe explore the potential for branching technologies, or for things that are not going and following that straight, one path for all. And perhaps we have an issue in the system that we're trying to address, or a reason that we've built the system, but then we have different forks or different branches that address the diversity that is actually in question here, because there's not a solution, one answer to a question for all races, for all genders, for all different means and measures of diversity here. So potentially, I don't know how that would look necessarily. I do think it would be very much possible, kind of in an if and situation. If you meet certain markers here or you don't here, then we go and take this different branch into how the system categorizes you or defines you, or what types of parameters are built around how you are looked at in a system. But I think that maybe this forking or branching idea for tailored technologies could potentially be a system to solving this infrastructure problem.
Alex or Anna, you want to take this one? Oh, Alex wrote in the chat.
Oh,
You just want to
basically,
read it?
I mean, I mean, I guess this isn't as directly relevant to the problem of classification, but I do think like kind of continuing on like the prior point of like, how do you get the incentive structure to change is like, well, the people actually deciding the incentives in the first place have to be the actual people like involved in society. Like, I mean, for example, like take the example of like predictive policing algorithms being created by Carnegie Mellon that are being rolled out by the Pittsburgh Police Department. Okay, so if we actually had democratic control of academia and industry, like we could actually have a system where that would never happen, because like obviously people would never vote for their own subjugation. They would never be in and collectively organized towards something that would be harmful towards them. Like, but instead we have elite groups and industry and police departments lobbying and essentially determining the course of research, which completely like busts a hole in any like thought that, you know, these pursuits are somehow intellectually like pure or noble just because it's being done in a university. But as it stands right now, universities are and companies are fueling the most undemocratic like rollouts of harmful technologies. And it seems like there's nothing we can do. But I do feel that if we had and continue to support and build organizations and unions that are needed to challenge power at that level, that's, I think, what it could look like.
Yeah, so thinking then about what kinds of layers of power and organizations would be needed in this view. We have 2 minutes left. And I'm just gonna, Anna, do you just want to read the comment that you put in your chat?
No, just just a productive sort of question and challenge to Alex's comments. Not that I'm not in disagreement in any way, right? But to think about the broader sort of set of symbolic, discursive, educational, and other sorts of things that need to be cultivated alongside the kinds of organizational and infrastructural changes that I think Alex is rightfully pointing at. And so my question was just, you know, putting a question mark next to the idea that people wouldn't vote for their own subjugation. And I don't think empirically that has always borne out. But that's not the end of the conversation. So that's why I said I just want to put that there and back away.
No, you don't have to back away. I mean, I think that's a totally fair point. And I feel like under the democratic systems we have now, like certainly that is the case. But I can imagine other systems that create like a democratic process that isn't like geared, or I guess that inclines people towards like choosing from a number of shitty options, but instead actually like had some substance to it. You know what I mean?
So we're gonna have to wrap this up. So I want to give you all, let's say, 1 minute with some thoughts to leave folks on, so you all get a final word. Um, yeah, Alex, final words.
Oh, If you would like to learn more about how to organize your workplace, you can reach out to me or your local DSA chapter or your local IWW, International Workers of the World chapter, and they would be happy to help you. And yeah, solidarity forever.
Amazing. Kendra?
That mute button. Also, along with Solidarity Forever, just kind of reiterating the points that I had today is that diversity isn't just in hiring, it's also in culture. That the invisible dimensions of identity are just as important as the visible, and the histories of classification really do matter. This is why lay expertise is so important in the development of these technologies. And especially for all of us, that, you know, reflexivity leads to, again, those gaps in knowledge, and that those gaps can only be filled by the diverse individuals and the groups and populations that these issues concern. So there's, again, no universal solution or method of classification that applies to everyone who's sorted in systems.
Awesome. And Anna?
I want to flag a comment that Morgan left in the chat. I do worry about the quote, I do worry about the inherently racist, misogynistic, transphobic, et cetera, foundation of, for example, the US, where most of this conversation is centered. And how does that implicate the idea of, you know, democratic processes or participation or other possible sort of alternative ways forward? And I want to flag that. And my closing thought is, if you're, and again, I focus a lot on ethics and ethics discourse. If your ethics starts from a commitment to an abstract principle of like fairness or equality that isn't tethered to these empirical histories of racial subjugation, of trans erasure, of gendered subjugation, if it doesn't start from there, you're not starting from anywhere. And just to be incredibly mindful, because there is an entire burgeoning ethics entrepreneurship industry that makes that cultivates its credibility by appealing to abstractions that are not sort of grounded or tied to these histories and facts. And so be wary.
And on that note, which I think is a great one to end, I want to thank you three so much for joining me and us today. Fantastic discussion. A few of us will be on the Twitters for an AMA. If you haven't yet, please sign the petition to support Tunisia Brew, because I think if anything, solidarity is the only way we're going to get through any of this, and fighting for a better future is only possible by doing it together. So thanks.
First, can I just say, I got this, Trevi. Thank you so much for opening this up. Alex, thank you so much for bringing this amazing group together. We couldn't have done this without you. I have a mad crush on Alex, and a few other folks do too. Alex Ahmed. Could you please get on Twitter so we can follow and stan you, please? Because I'm getting a lot of requests. Loved every one of you, and Kendra as well. And all of you are amazing. Full solidarity with Timnit. We'll do everything we can to support her, and just I know it's a very challenging time, but you taking the time to come and talk to us today was so incredibly powerful, and we are so grateful for all your time. Thank you so much.